Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to be looking at my choices for Artificer Spells, and I'm going to talk about most of the ones I like. I think that the Artificer spell list is kind of a mixed bag. You've got some nice buff spells and debuff spells, you've got a few damage spells in there, and you've got a couple battlefield control type spells as well. Although to be fair, I don't know that the spell list really excels at anything. However, once you start looking at the subclasses and adding those spells to your spell list, I do think that the Artificer starts to like round the list out a little bit, and you can kind of specialize a little more. So, it's not that it's a bad spell list, I just don't necessarily think that it's great. But you are a half caster, so I think that's kind of fair. That's a decent spot to be in. Also, I wanted to say quickly before we jump into this video, I've been thinking about for my next campaign, I'm not going to bother with this one because we're so far into it already, but I think for my next campaign, I might make a series of like just campaign diaries and talk about some of the game sessions and stuff. And I don't know if I'll do it for every game session. And this would be in addition to like my other videos, right? It's not going to replace any of them or anything like that. But I have had a few people say that one of their favorite things about my channel is all the crazy stories I have about our games and stuff. So, you know, I thought that might be interesting. Also, speaking of crazy stories, so the last week, my party finally fought Vecna, which they've been building up to for a while. They're only level 16, so they're a little low for somebody that proportion. But I kind of patterned them off Critical Role from Matt Mercer's version of Vecna, and then just scaled them back slightly. Because I think Vox Machina was like 19th level when they fought him, and they also had more players in their party. So I lowered his hit points, I gave him 5 legendary saves, same as Matt did, but I moved him down to 3 legendary actions per turn. But as things worked out, earlier the party, like a couple weeks ago, had fought this creature from one of the Kobold Press books, either Creature Codex or Tome of Beasts, and it's called a Skine Witch, and like or Skeen Witch, Skeen, what is Skine, whatever, however it's pronounced. Anyways, it's some sort of creature that can like read the threads of destiny, and one of its abilities that I thought was just hilarious and had no practical application in combat really, at least not for fighting it, was that it would try to like read the threads of destiny, and every player character had to write down on a piece of paper how they thought the player to the left would die and at what level. And it didn't really take effect at all in that game, right? But then the players after the game were asking me what it did, and I made the mistake of telling them because their characters didn't actually know. But the thing is, if the character dies at that level and under the right circumstances, then they're considered to have fulfilled their destiny, and they're immediately given like a true resurrection spell. They come back to life with full hit points, all their spell slots are restored, etc. And they gain some piece of like information or some vision of the future, right? So I just thought there was a cool ability, and all the players had fun making up how they thought the player to the left was going to die. But of course, my friend Troy, once he realized this, he realized that he had written down that the Artificer in our party would die fighting Vecna at our current level. And that seemed like a pretty good guess since they were about to fight Vecna. However, he also got the idea halfway through the fight that if the Artificer dies fighting Vecna, he's going to come back with full health and all his spell slots. So maybe I should just help that happen so he can just, you know, get a recharge. And then they realized that one of the other players, they'd written down that she would die due to friendly fire. So sure enough, during the fight, the Paladin ends up going down, and then I believe it was Troy's rogue who ends up like shooting her while she's like laying on the ground. She really was like a 1, I think, on her first death saving throw, so that's 2 automatic fails. And then the rogue just shoots her while she's laying on the ground. Oh no, it was the druid that killed her, sorry. So the druid kills her while she's like laying on the ground. And then the Artificer ends up dying, so both of them come back to life with full hit points. And that ended up probably being what won the party the fight, because it was not going very well. Even though I scaled back a couple of Vecna's abilities, he was just absolutely crushing them. I didn't want to give him like power word kill, because I always find it really cheap to just like power word kill a player, and then whoever got targeted just always feels kind of crappy because they didn't get to even do anything, and if they can't counterspell it, their character's just dead. So instead I decided he would use his 9th level spell slot on Blade of Disaster, or Black Blade of Disaster it used to be called. Because I figured, you know, it would do some nice damage, it would be a nice kind of presence on the battlefield. It was a spell that none of the enemies had ever used in any of the games before. But, overall, it wouldn't be like a player killer. However, I was very wrong about that assessment. It turns out that when you have 5 legendary saving throws, you don't lose concentration very often. And the sword attacks twice a round. It does 4d12 force damage on a regular hit, but it crits on an 18, 19, or 20. And if it crits, it does triple damage instead of double damage, so 12d8. And he crit like 2 or 3 times during the fight, and that was a serious player dropper. And then, like I said, like the Paladin crit him once. She did 101 damage, dropped her highest level spell slot on the Smite, of course. And so that's like a DC, 51 saving throw or whatever it was. He rolls a 3, gets his con bonus, of course, and then it's like, well, I failed by like 35 or 40. I'll just use a legendary saving throw instead. The players were not too happy about that. And then he immediately crit the Paladin right after that with the Black Blade, and that's what ended up dropping her to the ground. Then she then, of course, rolled a 1 on her death save and was put out of her misery by the Druid. Yeah, anyways, it was a pretty entertaining game. It was pretty fun. The party did win in the end, of course, although, like I said, it was pretty touch and go there for a while. And, those are always good fights in my opinion. I like pushing them to their limits. But anyways, that was a huge detour. Hopefully in the future, like I said, I'll just make a series of videos to talk about some of this stuff, which I think is funny. It won't be like a weekly thing, because I don't know if there'll be enough content in any given week. But I'll combine, like, here's what happened, over the last 3-4 game sessions. And then I should have enough content for video. But anyways, jumping into the Artificer spell list, now that all that's over. Starting with cantrips. We have Booming Blade and, of course, Green Flame Blade, both on the list. I think these are pretty good if you want to be a melee-focused character, which Artificers can do quite well, right? I don't think they're essential, but they're not bad. I think they perform even better on characters who can, like Eldritch Knight, who can use one, they can cast a cantrip and then make a melee attack all in the same round still, right? Or on like anybody who's like multi-classed with a sorcerer, for example, where you could quicken spell, like either Warlock who wanted to go like Pact of the Blade maybe, or Paladin. It really starts to excel when you can make your normal action and then as a bonus action also hit somebody with a Green Flame Blade or a Booming Blade. But even still, it's also really great if you have Warcaster, of course, because then you can use it on your opportunity attacks. Either way, though, not a bad spell. I kind of like it. Firebolt, kind of a staple. Decent damage, nice range. Not much to say there. Frostbite, poor damage, but nice effect. And if you don't really care about the damage, which a lot of times you just don't, it might be worth looking into. Guidance, one of the best cantrips in the entire game, in my opinion. If it's available on my spell list, I pretty much always take it. It's just too handy. Light, you always seem to have, somebody in your party with no dark vision, so somebody should have it. Doesn't have to necessarily be you, but somebody probably wants it. Mage Hand, situational, but very handy, and it's not that situational. Like, there's lots of opportunities to, just magic hand something over, right? So I don't think it's bad. Mending, pretty good. Prestidigitation, again, very flexible, very nice. I like it quite a bit. And finally, we have Ray of Frost, makes my list. Less damage than a Firebolt, but not by much, like 1 per die, usually. Way less range, but again, a pretty nice rider effect. And frankly, it is a better damage type. Frost is usually less resisted than Fire. Still pretty commonly resisted or immune, but not as bad. Absorb Elements, going on to level 1 spells here. Absorb Elements, honestly, just one of the greatest defensive spells in the entire game, in my opinion. This is one that I just keep prepared forever, essentially. Especially as I level up more and more and you start getting higher and higher level spells. Your first level spells just don't really compete that well. But something like Absorb Elements is something that you will always have a spot for. In fact, as you fight more and more powerful enemies, it's more and more likely that you'll have to deal with elemental damages of various different types. And so Absorb Elements actually just seems to get better and better as you go, I find. Alarm, circumstantial, but it is a ritual, which is at least worth remembering. Catapult. This is one I never really gave much credit to, but the Artificer in my current campaign uses it quite a bit, and with pretty good effect. It's got huge range on it, okay damage. It's actually not a bad spell, so I've had to change my position on it after seeing it in use a lot. Cure Wounds. You're probably never going to be the party's primary healer, at least let's pray you aren't, because you're not exactly great at the job. But it is nice to have somebody that, maybe the cleric goes down and you want somebody who can get the cleric back up into the fight, not just like stabilize them and stop them from bleeding out on the battlefield. It is never a bad thing to have somebody else with a cure spell around, right? So not a bad choice. Detect Magic, again, it's a ritual, makes it worth having. Fairy Fire. This is another one of these rare first level spells that I will probably keep prepared forever. You can use it to find invisible creatures, which isn't the worst thing ever, and occasionally is useful. But of course, the main thing is to just cast it on a bunch of enemies, give all yourself and your allies advantage in all your attacks, and then just, profit. And a lot of times, Fairy Fire is a kind of first level spell that could literally just be the difference in a big battle, and there's not a lot of first level spells that still retain that ability as you level up higher and higher. False Life. I like this one at lower levels. Obviously, it's going to be even better on a Warlock where you could get it as an invocation and just cast it at will. But the fact that you could give yourself a bunch of temporary hit points before a big fight isn't the worst thing ever. Especially if you know that big fight's about to happen. Like you have to kill the Goblin King and you've cleared out the rest of the lair and you're about to enter the throne room and you're like, I should probably buff myself a bit. The fact that it's no concentration makes it pretty handy, so I kind of like it. Again, one that doesn't scale particularly well. By the time, when you've got like 10 or 12 hit points, or even 15 or 20, False Life is a nice, decent boost, right? When you have 120, like, no one cares anymore. It's worthless. But, still worth mentioning. Featherfall. This is just one of those spells that's highly circumstantial. You could go the entire campaign and never cast it once, but then you'll have that one time you didn't have it prepared, and, then you plummet to your death, and then you'll never leave it unprepared again. So, at least worth considering. Grease. Very small area of effect, but you don't have a lot of battlefield control spells, especially at first level. So it's at least worth considering. It's a pretty nice effect for a first level spell, at least. I don't think it's bad. You also have Identify, very useful, and Sanctuary. Again, I don't think Sanctuary is exactly the strongest buff out there, but there is no concentration, and that at least makes it worth considering. And, it can be pretty handy sometimes. I've seen it make a difference in tough fights, Moving on to level 2. Level 2 is a pretty good level for you, I find. You've got a lot of decent spells here. So we're starting off the list with Aid. Again, more hit points, but this time for your party, no concentration. And unlike False Life, for example, they're not temporary hit points. It's just increased to your hit point maximum, which is far better because then it stacks with temporary hit points. Alter Self, kind of circumstantial, but if you want to do like a bit of party face type stuff, it can be handy. Infiltration type missions, it can be pretty handy. Depending on the type of character you've tried to build, it can be pretty good. And, if you're just some weird looking robot freak thing that doesn't fit in very well, it might be handy for that too, just to not get, villagers with pitchforks. Blur, very nice spell. Does require concentration, unfortunately, but especially on, the more combat focused artificers, if you're going to be up in the front lines, it is pretty good. Enhance ability. Again, very nice buff. I like it quite a bit. Enlarge Reduce. Very flexible spell. You can use it either as a buff to do more damage to somebody in the party, or you can use it to, get through things like doors that your rogue was unable to, open for the party because he turns out to be terrible at his job. Just terrible. Didn't take expertise on his thieves' tools, barely even has any dexterity. He decided to make a bugbear rogue or some other clownish build like that, and now it turns out he's terrible at his only main job. So that's why you had to take Enlarge Reduce. Heat Metal. This spell is just ridiculously underrated, I think. It's so good against anything using metal, armor, or weapons. Again, this is one that the Artificer in my current campaign just abused so much at lower levels. And it is just a great spell. The damage isn't super high, but forcing people to drop their weapons or casting on their armor and then giving them a disadvantage because now they can't drop it, it is pretty glorious. And granted, it's only really good against things that are smart enough to wear armor or use weapons, right? So against a lot of monsters that are not humanoid types, it starts to lose a lot of its value very quickly. But, you know, there's always orcs and goblins and kobolds and a million what other such things to fight at these levels. So I think it's a pretty nice spell to have. Invisibility, very, very good. Obviously, not a lot of explanation needed. Lesser Restoration. This is one that you hope you don't need to take, that somebody else in the party has it, maybe a life cleric or something. But if nobody has it, yeah, somebody probably needs to take it, and it appears that somebody is you. Levitate. I like the fact that you can use it to, you know, just overcome obstacles, but I also like you could use it on some like giant ogre or something and just float him up into the air if he fails a saving throw. The dual nature of it makes it a pretty good spell, in my opinion. Magic Weapon. This is one that I usually hold in fairly low regard, but I always mention that it's really good at low levels when you might not actually have access to magical weapons yet. However, I hold it in even lower regard on an Artificer because you can imbue items and make them magical, including weapons. So, you know, it's a spell that's already kind of iffy. Once your party's reached the point where everybody essentially has a magical weapon, the spell is completely worthless at that point. And even before that, it's of questionable value in some campaigns. But I did want to mention it because there are some lower magic campaigns, or maybe you wanted to imbue some other items, or maybe a couple people have your imbued magic weapons, but somebody doesn't, and you kind of need them to be able to hit the stuff too, right? So, again, one that I might prepare at lower levels, but I'm definitely getting rid of it as we level up. Finally, Rope Trick. I used to think this spell was absolutely worthless until somebody pointed out that you could use it to take a short rest. And if your party has things like fighters and warlocks in it who really, really excel with multiple short rests, then this spell has even more value. But either way, it can be pretty handy. Moving on to level 3, we have Blink. Again, pretty nice spell, especially defensively. It can be very, very nice. Dispel Magic. Dispel Magic, if it's on my spell list, I'm probably taking Dispel Magic. It's just so highly useful. Fly. Fly, of course, is a great spell. In fact, it's the reason that Gaseous Form almost never appears on any of my lists. And it's not that Gaseous Form was bad, and it's not that it doesn't have its own niches where it could take you like under doors or places that Fly couldn't. It's just that, in general, Fly will do most of what Gaseous Form does, but way better. And, you know, it's pretty hard to ignore. Haste. Again, if I'm playing a more melee-focused character, it can be pretty good on me. But I usually find it's just better casting it on like the Barbarian or some other big just combat beast who's just going to be in there crushing people, and now he's getting more armor class as well, more movement as well, and of course the extra attack. So I like it even better on like the big, you know, big strong fighter type guys. But it's not bad on you either. Just a nice spell in general. Revivify. Once again, this is where you hope you have a life cleric or somebody else in the party who can just cast this for you and you don't have to worry about it. But also, if you don't have anybody with it, somebody probably needs to have it. And once again, that somebody is you, it appears. Level 4, Arcane Eye. I love this spell a lot. It's a great scouting tool. Really nothing bad to say about it. Fabricate. Mostly I chose this spell because I think it's very thematic for the Artificer. You're just creating stuff. Fabricate is, you know, right up your alley. But I also think it's a pretty decent spell, and if you're kind of creative, you can find some nice uses for it. Freedom of movement. This is one where, you know, hopefully you never need it, but when you need it, you kind of need it in a hurry. You know, and it's not just for you, it could be for other people in your party who get caught in a web spell or whatever else, right? So I think it's pretty decent. Resilient Sphere. I like the dual nature of the spell. I can use it as a crowd control effect. I could also use it to save a party member who, gets maybe knocked out, and you're fighting a creature where the DM decides that he's just going to keep mauling that poor down character until he kills him. And then you're like, I didn't prepare Revivify because, I didn't think we'd need it. Oops. Resilient Sphere that guy so he doesn't die. And then take care of him once the combat's over. Stone Shape, very handy spell. I like it a lot, especially in dungeons. You can abuse the terrain a lot. We're just gonna make a hole right here in the floor and drop down to the next level. You can do some nice stuff with it. And then you Featherfall to justify you having that spell slot prepared all this time and never using it. Vitriolic Sphere, some pretty nice damage. It's acid, which is not that commonly resisted. I think that's pretty handy. And the damage is actually pretty good. Like, it's actually higher damage than an upcast fireball would be at level 4, right? So that is pretty decent, I think. Even though I'm not a huge fan of damage spells overall. But, it's worth mentioning. Level 5, Anoid Objects. This is already one of the best 5th level spells in the game, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm going to recommend it. Bigby's Hand, very flexible, very awesome. I like Bigby's Hand. Creation, similar to Fabricate, situational, but mostly thematic. I just really like the idea of the spell. But I will say that as a half caster, you aren't going to have 5th level spell slots until you are level 17. And then even then, you have almost no 5th level spell slots. So it does become very hard for me to justify actually taking the spell in practice. So while I love the theory of it, I don't blame anybody for not taking it. Greater Restoration. See every other cleric spell we've mentioned above, like Revivify and Lesser Restoration. Somebody needs it. Hopefully it wasn't you. Hopefully your party has been able to cast Greater Restoration prior to you hitting 17th level. But if not, it's at least worth mentioning on the list. And then finally, my last two choices. Transmute Rock, again, the flexibility of it makes me really like it, and it can be a nice battlefield control spell. And finally, Wall of Stone, which, let's face it, it's not quite as good as Wall of Force, but it's pretty darn close. And when it comes to battlefield control spells, that's going to just go on the floor. When it comes to battlefield control spells, it is definitely one of the best choices you can make, I think, on the Artificer. Again, this spell is just way better on like a wizard or somebody who might have had it at 9th level instead. But it's certainly still a great spell. Even at 17th level, you might want to Wall of Stone, cut the enemies in half, focus on one half, drop the wall, kill the other half. And, Divide and Conquer is a very value and time-tested strategy. So nothing wrong with that. But anyways, that's it for this video. I'm going to make a part 2 where we will go through all the different subclasses and their various spells. But I don't want this video to be an hour long, and I already spent way too much time just talking at the beginning of the video, so, we'll try to keep it a little more concise. But anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching. Feel free to comment, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, all that kind of stuff. Most importantly, though, I'd love to hear your comments. I personally think the Artificer is a really interesting class. And I'm quite enjoying seeing my friend Jaden play one in this campaign. And he's played 2 different subclasses. He actually changed subclasses at one point. So we've gotten a feel for 2 of the different ones. Hopefully he changes subclasses 2 more times during the campaign. And then we'll be able to test out all 4 of them. Because that won't get old ever. But anyways, thank you for watching. And I'll see you next time. Bye.